Welcome to the Polypolitics Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Turner, where opinions are challenged and facts matter. A place for honest conversations and unfiltered perspectives. My guest today is Dr. Anita Kellogg. Dr. Kellogg is an assistant professor at the National Defense University, where she teaches strategic competition, industrial mobilization, and national security. She holds a PhD in political science from UCLA and studies how trade, critical minerals, and financial power shape great power competition. She's written for the Washington Post, and she co-hosts the Kellogg's Global Politics Podcast. Dr. Kellogg, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So, again, I have talked to so many people, and we kind of talked about this before the show. I've talked to so many people where we talk about things like the war in Iran, and we generally talk about, kinetic warfare. We talk about bombs on targets. We talk about, the inability of the Navy to hold the Strait of Hormuz, or, how we think that the military is doing, or how the Iranian military is fighting back against a larger power like the United States. But I think a lot of times we don't really talk about the economic side as much as we should. And I think that's like kind of really rearing its head, specifically in this Iran situation, as they're using things like drone warfare to specifically shut down the Strait of Hormuz, to affect the economic welfare of the United States and U.S. citizens, to try to put pressure on that. Tell me a little bit about that. What are you seeing going on here?
Yeah, I think it's a problem that we view war only in this sort of kinetic sense. And I actually wrote an article for War on the Rocks very recently talking about how, from military strategy, we have to incorporate economic statecraft. It's not economics is a soft power issue or something separate from kinetics. As we see in the Iran war, yet, as you mentioned, using drones to affect the economics of the globe, essentially, but particularly the United States, to pressure them to end their campaign or pause it, as we did for so long, because of the economic effects that closing the Strait of Hormuz has caused. It is more important than people give it credit for, and kind of interestingly, it shouldn't have been a surprise. Like, Iran has realized for a long time that it's vulnerable to attacks like from the United States. It obviously doesn't have as big of a military as the United States. So it had been planning for some time for economic warfare to balance off its vulnerabilities. And so there were reports to this. It seems like our administration was surprised, but I'm not exactly sure why that would be, but certainly is an important element of the type of war that's going on.
It's a great question why anybody was surprised. I believe this has been in, war planning for probably 3 decades. What would happen if we attacked Iran? But yeah, I think that really, normal everyday U.S. citizens are seeing the effects of this economic warfare. With it, gas prices are going up, grocery prices are going up. I think actually just today at the recording of this, I think they was just announced that mortgage rates are even higher, just or at the highest since before the war started, so in about a year. So we're seeing the economic effects of this. Do you think that that's why Iran maybe isn't so quick to give up, because they know they can affect these types of things?
Absolutely. That's, this war has continued much longer than even I thought it would. And this is largely the reason, because they know that they're putting pressure on the U.S. government, and it is limiting the perhaps full strength of the U.S. military to go after Iran. And it's definitely changed things and allowed the regime to survive, which is in itself a kind of win so far for Iran.
Well, yeah. Because Iran doesn't think about this in a way of winning and losing military equipment, the way that the people in the United States generally see warfare. The regime is trying to survive, like you said. And I think that a lot of times, especially with the Trump administration and what they're doing right now, and the way that I see them doing negotiations, they're looking at it almost like a real estate deal. As long as there's a financial benefit for both parties, everybody's going to walk away happy. And it kind of loses the ideological component of it, of just survival, right? Because we don't see that as much in the United States. Even though we have had some challenges to certain parts of our democracy, we still live in a democracy where we have elections where people are being replaced and stuff like that. They don't care about that. They don't have that political pressure from their constituents, because they're they're a totalitarian regime essentially, right? So as long as they can still keep getting money in, I think they're fine. Well, they think they're fine. I don't think they're fine. They think they're fine, I think, is a better way to put that. But yeah, so we're seeing this, and like there's been attacks on national, like I said, natural gas resources. I heard that fertilizer has been like a really big problem. I talked to actually a representative out of South Dakota who's running for a Democratic representative out of South Dakota, who was talking about how she has lots of farmers that can't get fertilizer. They're taking huge hits on crops. How long are these economic effects going to affect us in the United States?
I think it will take time, of course, for after the strait reopens for oil shipment to resume its normal amount and some lasting effects. Qatar having to close its natural gas and maybe oil fields it'll take time to restart. You can't there's not a spigot that you can turn on and off. But prices might go down faster than you think because a lot of it is driven by futures. And if they have more confidence that, the oil shipping is going to be resuming, then I think you'll definitely see a decline in price. So it probably won't take too long to at least see some relief. For other goods like fertilizers you mentioned, again, there is a delay, but I don't know how long of a delay it would be. Probably not too substantial.
Well, what do you mean by not too substantial, if you don't mind? Like maybe a year, maybe 6 months? Just to
I'd
try
say
to,
like by 6 months, I would expect things to have gone back pretty much.
Well, that's not bad. That's not. I mean, not that that's good. I'm just saying, like, because I've heard some theories saying it's going to take us years to recover from certain things, a decade to recover from certain things. And so it's I mean, it's good for the American economy to know that, like, hey, we're resilient enough to kind of bounce back from a lot of those things. Because I think especially after COVID, a lot of us saw that while our economy was quite resilient, I mean, I think we're still seeing lingering effects economically from what happened on that, right?
Right. And I'm not saying there won't be any effects at all because, of course, there could be. But I think there is a desire, of course, for the countries to be selling these things. So there will definitely be delays. You catch up inventory, right? That can't happen all at once. It could even take maybe longer than 6 months. But I think there will be an eagerness and a willingness to try to get back to normal as soon as possible. And I'm assuming in this reopening that it might take a couple months for it to completely regain traffic because they have to demine the area. But I think there's just so much pressure, economic pressure from the entire world that they will make that a priority.
And when you say there's so much pressure for the whole world, who's going to make that the priority? Because it doesn't seem like Iran's making it a priority. It doesn't seem like they're
right. They're not.
In a big rush
but
at
I
all.
mean, in terms of getting ships through, I think you'll see the U.S. military work very hard on demining as soon as possible. I think there'll be efforts to get insurance to cover these ships again once they know it is fully safe. So, I mean, this depends on a true end to the conflict, not just temporarily reopening the Strait of Hormuz, but a settlement that people will think will last some time.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, we're recording this on July 16th. And as of today, I think we're on day 5 straight of intensified strikes by the U.S. military in Iran. So I think we're maybe a little further away than we thought we were going to be, after the signing of the MOU. So I maybe a little further than we were then, but hopefully we can get back to something quickly. Now, we talked about the U.S. like recovering economically. What do you think it looks like for Iran as far as them recovering economically? Like how is that? Because I mean, they are being put out of a lot right now. Their inability to ship their oil out at the same rate that they were doing before. The blockades of all these things. It's very much hurting Iran too. So how do you think they're going to be affected by this economically, like going forward? And how long do you think they'll be affected by this?
Well, I think in general, between the sanctions that we previously had on Iran, plus the effects of the war, I think it's going to take at least a decade for them to fully recover. But on the other hand, especially if we come to a settlement where we drop a lot of the sanctions we have on Iran, I think there's a lot of promise for the Iranian economy. So it may take a long time to get back up, but I think it has the potential for being very strong. And the strongest it's been in decades because we've had these sanctions on it so long. I think something we've underestimated is just the resilience because they have been under sanctions. They know what economic hardship is like. Right. And so even though this has added to that, I think they're just so accustomed to having those conditions around them that it's made them extra resilient.
Yeah, they're like this is nothing new, right? Like we're used to either dealing with these type of things or finding ways around them, which we know they've been doing for a long time also. Secret oil shipments and other things like that. Very interesting. I wanted to kind of change topics because I know when I personally think of economic warfare,
Mm-hmm.
the first place I think about is China, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had a trade war that started, under Donald Trump in his first term, was pretty much continued through Joe Biden in his term, has seemed to have escalated. We've seen tariffs go on across a whole bunch of other countries, but specifically China has been like the main target. And we've seen a lot of other deals that China's been making with, some of our allied countries, at pretty much the U.S.'s expense for certain things. How are we navigating this? Like, or how should we be navigating this? I mean, we're seeing prices go up, right, due to the trade war. We're seeing, we're not seeing this spark of U.S. development economically as a result of this trade war. So where are we going right? Where are we going wrong? What's going on with all that?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand from China's perspective, it absolutely does not want to use this military, right? But it does want to coerce other nations to do what it wants. And it feels like being such an economic power, it should be able to do that. So they've strategically structured their economy for other countries to have these great dependencies that they can then use as a tool of coercion. And of course, this includes investment like the Belt and Road Initiative, which, as you mentioned, has a lot of our allies involved in. And one study I'm working on looks at the relationship between these types of investments and getting countries to de-recognize Taiwan. So, and I think Taiwan is a really big issue. So I think we need to recognize what China's strategy has been over the last few decades and then think about how we can reduce our dependence. One of them, of course, is to reshore a lot of the manufacturing that we're dependent on. But I think it's unrealistic to think all of a sudden we're going to build this huge manufacturing sector, right? I mean, It's going to take time, and we can't do it without allies. We need to be encouraging investment in allies and recognizing the fact that we need them if we want to diversify supply outside of China. I think we talk a lot about how much China dominates manufacturing, and that's true. But even our ability to manufacture depends on critical minerals. And that is where China holds this huge chokehold. They process 90% of all critical minerals. So 90% of any critical mineral you have to buy through China. Extraction, the mining, we talk about that a lot, and that's a little more diversified, but it really only matters the processing part. And so for us to even manufacture the type of goods we want to reduce dependency on China, we need those critical minerals. And China knows it. And so China has definitely been using this, bans on rare earths, which it is reduced for a year as part of a settlement, but still, like, defense companies still can't get access to these things. And they're just a critical component to our entire economy. And so we have to think again about the types of investments we need in our country, but also understand it's a long-term thing and that we just can't do it without allies.
So let me dig into that a little bit, because especially when we talk about things like how that were going on with like Greenland, right? No, Greenland's going to be, belong to the U.S. And we hear so much about the reason why we want to go there. Well, because of, military bases and strategic positioning. But a lot of it was because they have a huge stash of, of natural resources, of those minerals that are underneath, ice layers and all sorts of stuff there. But you're saying that even if we got them, we don't have the ability to process them, so it doesn't even matter.
Exactly. That is such an important point that gets missed in the whole conversation. Yes, we want to diversify extraction, but it's not enough, and it's not even the main point. If we're producing out of our mines, and we have a tremendous natural resources in the United States, we can mine it. But if we have to then send it to China, we're ultimately having to buy these minerals back from China, and that prevents our ability to, like I said, manufacture an iPhone. We couldn't do that here. We can't manufacture almost anything here without these sort of minerals.
So this processing of these minerals, is that something that we do here at all, or is it just like at a very limited function?
Very, very limited. We have a couple of copper smelters, an aluminum smelter. We're starting to. So part of the deal where the United States essentially gave MP Materials like $400 million or something like that was to with the condition of them building more processing of these rare earth minerals. The government also took an equity stake in a Korean company for a zinc smelter, I believe, and that's supposed to produce some other things, not just zinc. So we are starting to make those investments, but I think we still focus too much on extraction. And of course, we do need a diversified supply, but we need processing even more, and we definitely need more attention to it.
That's really great because I don't think I've ever heard that before, and I'm just being completely honest with you. And I've talked to a lot of people about. I don't think I've ever heard about this this producing of it. And why? I mean, it sounds like this should be the place where we're investing even more heavily, right? Because
Yeah,
we had the Chips and Sciences Act, bringing people like NVIDIA, TSMC over the United States to try to isolate us from chips, after we had a problem with that under COVID. And, I think that was a great policy. I think that we absolutely needed to do that, especially when it came to, the future, when it comes to electric cars, chips, AI, all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, are these the same minerals that go to build those chips too?
absolutely. You need them in chips. You need lithium, cobalt, nickel for EV batteries. You need copper. You need rare earths for wind turbines. For any type, for car magnets that go into the cars, you need rare earths. I mean, just to build any of these things, yes, we absolutely have to have access to these minerals.
Are we seeing, within the government right now, are we seeing any big pushes in legislation to try to get to significantly reduce this production value or this production capability? Because you're saying it's just starting. You'd mentioned some copper and some zinc ones, but it seems like this should be an incredibly high priority for what we're doing. Are we seeing any big initiatives from any pieces of legislation?
I don't think so. And you definitely have seen bipartisan on permitting of mines, right? Opening more mines.
Yeah.
I think we spend so much on opening new mines and so much of our legislative energy on that because it's easier, right? I mean,
Sure.
it takes decades to open a mine, but that's easier to fix, right? We can make permitting regulations, adjust those. We can fix that, and we have that here, and we know how to mine. Part of the processing is even knowing how to do it, right? I mean, we kind of invented how to process rare earth minerals, but we don't have that know-how anymore. And so you have some pilot programs trying to figure that out, but we don't have the people and the knowledge to be able to do these things today for the most part. And so gathering that knowledge, figuring out ways, and again, I just think it has to be done with allies. There's so many obstacles. Money, it's very hard to do this at cost, let alone making a profit. So you have to have substantial government resources go into it. You have to figure out how to do it environmentally safe, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to suddenly pollute the environment as much as China does. So that raises the cost. China's selling things below cost, so you have to give them a reason to buy something at a higher price. And that's definitely really difficult.
You bring up a good point there. Like, China's polluting is this process of these minerals, is this a high pollution type of processing? Is that what it is?
Absolutely. I mean, it can produce a lot of pollution. So environmentally, mining is tricky, but so is processing, maybe even more so.
Okay. So do you think that maybe that's one of the big holdups? Because I mean, in the United States, we are, even though we're, we different levels throughout our government of environmentally conscious legislation. I think we're leaps and bounds ahead of China. Is it just one of those things that is we can't do because it's just so, in order to make that process so environmentally friendly, we would have to make it just so expensive that it wouldn't even work?
Right. Ultimately, it's determined by economics, right? Nobody wants to invest in this because, yes, the price of being able to sell them would be so much higher than what China can do. And so, again, unless you give people a reason to pay a higher price, and that's really, really difficult to do, it's just not seen as a good investment. So you're not getting private equity or anyone else to actually put in money to build these sort of things. So I think we can solve the environmental problem, but it's the money problem that it ultimately inhibits this development.
It almost feels like one of those things, because I do I 100% agree we should be as environmentally friendly as possible, but we also have to worry about our national defense. We also have to worry about things like that, and so it really has to be a balance here in order to be able to isolate ourselves from being under such strict control of China from China, because I mean, what you're saying to me sounds like China kind of has us by the throat, that they kind of have a little chokehold on us. If they're the only ones that can process these materials at mass, and we need these at mass in order to like you said, do anything from make an iPhone to probably make a missile, then it seems like they kind of have us, and that's without ever firing a shot.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and especially from a national security perspective, which is how I study these things. Environmental does seem just like a blockage to that we should. Some people I know think we should just get rid of it completely to build this because it's so critical to our national security. I think we need to be having better conversations, and yes, having legislation to make some exceptions in these cases to maybe the highest environmental standards, but I think what environmentalists really need to understand is that they can't just block these things, that they need to be in conversation with us, because basically putting the pollution somewhere else doesn't mean that when we're building something, that pollution is not happening. So they need to become engaged in the process and understand the realities of it, that instead of trying to block progress, they make things as good as possible, but that you have to relax some of the standards probably for national security reasons.
Right, because the pollution is still going to end up in the environment. It's just whether we do it or China does it.
Absolutely.
And so I think I'm with you on that one. Like, and there's so many places that we relax environmental standards in government that are not national security necessary, right? Like, perfect example, California was trying to go like all new cars by whatever year had to be all electric. I think that's something you could probably do without causing a national security incident, right? Like, I don't think we need our tanks to be electric, like I think they can still run on diesel, right? So like those are things that I think that, we maybe should deprioritize some of these things that are less important for national security and prioritize things more like this. I mean, that's where I would say it.
It's a balance, right? Of course, you don't want to become China and just pollute your environment, right?
Very much so, yeah.
So you just so I think that's important to stay. You don't want to get rid of all regulations, but you definitely do want to find more of a balance. And I think, you can't make those electric cars without these minerals either, right?
True.
So it is about balancing priorities. And I think for people to be more aware of the national security or having more of a conversation, I think there are a select group of people that are having conversations about critical minerals. But I think, not enough people understand the fundamentals of it, and definitely not enough people understand that the chokehold is on the processing part, and that's what we need to be working on.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely didn't understand that. I don't think it's talked about enough. But yeah, I do think that a lot of people sometimes don't understand all of the national security implications of things that are happening,
or understand why they should care about it. I mean, I think
Very
that's
true.
Right. I think people are very focused on their day to day and not necessarily tuned in to why every national security issue should be something. So I think how it affects them, how it affects our everyday products is important to emphasize.
Well, I think a lot of people from the national security side, I think from people that are living their everyday life, not people that, study it intensely.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, all they see is that number for the defense budget that just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. And they're sitting at their houses going, well, so is my grocery prices or my gas prices. Yeah. So is my rent prices. And you want to give, the military an extra $1 trillion or whatever. I believe there was just an NDA that was just shot down just recently, which had covered a whole bunch of stuff in there. But I think a lot of people just use it. Oh, we got to be more environmentally friendly to get these minerals. They're like, I'm trying to figure out how we're eating tonight. I don't try to think about that, but I do think it is important. I think that if we could take complicated subjects like this that have to do with national security and kind of put it in layman's terms and give it out to people, I think that they do understand, they do care about it. Because I think when it's explained like this, it makes a lot of sense to most people that would hear it. I mean, I can't imagine that most people are like, oh no, I want to, I want to make sure China has a stranglehold on us on our defense or our weapons or our ability to produce cars or anything like that. And I think most people would probably really care about that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's just about having the conversation outside of the Beltway or outside of, some specialists. So yeah, that's why I think it's really important. And yeah, I think you're right that people are aware of the tensions with China and do want a more resilient economy towards China. But it is hard because things are expensive and you do need things like a bigger defense budget to make the kind of investments, because private equity and private money is never going to go into processing initially, right? If you have some signals from the government and some ways of you think of actually making a profit, like for MP Materials, they did an offtake agreement and a price floor where they have guaranteed that they will buy all the results of these minerals that they're processing and mining, and that they'll buy them at a certain price. Well, that's very expensive to do, but that's sort of some of the things you need to do to get also private equity. Okay, now I know there's a profit to be made here, and so we're more willing to invest.
Yeah, I feel like I mean, we talked about the Chips and Sciences Act earlier. I feel like something that could be done similar to that, right?
Right.
Incentivize,
Yeah.
subsidize,
Exactly.
and get companies willing to do it, and then let the profit come later. And I feel like that is something important that we should do. I mean, it sounds right to me.
The workforce aspect of this, we graduate 300 mining engineers, where China graduate per year, where China graduates 10,000 or something like that. We don't also, like I said, processing is really tricky because we don't have the know-how to do it in many of these cases. So we need to also be educating a workforce that can provide the know-how to do these things. That's just another element of it.
Well, first of all, I didn't know mining engineer was a thing, so thank you for informing me on that. So there's already something that I didn't know. But you actually mentioned this earlier, and thank you for bringing that back up, because I did want to mention it. You said we invented the process and then we don't do it anymore. Is that what you said earlier?
Right. So when you stop, so we kind of invented the processing for rare earth minerals, and then China bought it out. I think GM was actually the company that had this process. China came and looked at it. They ultimately just bought it. Well, that was decades ago, and so all those people who had worked in that industry, they're not there anymore. They're gone. They're not resources anymore. And so being able to do it, and of course we are trying to do it at a more environmentally friendly sort of way. Like I said, in my class, we visited and talked to a lot of these professionals and saw some pilot programs that are promising, but it's been very difficult to translate results in a lab to industrial scale.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I understand. But that's a very interesting stuff. Like I said, this is kind of eye-opening to me, because I've never thought about it through that lens, which I find is very interesting. Because just generally, when I'm talking about China and I'm talking about the economy, obviously we talk about Taiwan quite a bit, right? Obviously we talk about consumer products that are getting here or not getting here due to tariffs, or how Walmart's getting their next delivery. But I always just kind of seem like, oh, the minerals, we've got to go get them out of the ground and we'll deal with it. Never thought about the rest of it. Speaking of which, though, moving on to consumer products a little bit, I understand it sounds like the rare earth minerals might be, especially the processing of it, might be the main way that China is kind of putting pressure on us and on other nations that may be our allies. How else are they doing it? Is there other ways that they're doing it? Because it seems like they have a lot of control right now in the way that we're working or not working with each other.
Well, of course. So we offshored much of our manufacturing industry over to China. So now all those sort of goods that we used to make in the United States are now made in China. Now, as an economist, that's not entirely a bad thing. But because it became so much of one source, being China, has given them tremendous amount of leverage. So when we try to apply tariffs, they can apply tariffs back. And so they can just raise the costs very easily for everyday goods that are coming from China. And I just want to emphasize, it's not like we should have manufacturing everything ourselves, right? That's a really inefficient economy, and there would be a lot of losers in that, and things would be a lot more expensive. But we can think about in terms of diversification, that we want more than just China manufacturing these things. So encouraging development and manufacturing in other countries. some of the complicatedness is that China will sometimes ship its goods through third countries, right? Like Vietnam is a pretty standard case. So it's not uncomplicated. But I think encouraging working with allies, seeing that this is manufactured in friendly places that are going to be a little more resistant to Chinese coercion. And I think developing closer economic relationships that we're here for you if China does try to use economic coercion.
So what you're saying, it's not all about bringing the jobs here and bringing the manufacturing here. It's about them just not all being in one other
Absolutely.
location, right?
Absolutely.
Interesting. So, because I think that a lot of people, when they heard, oh, we're doing 100, I don't know, what did we get up to? 140% tariffs, I think at some point.
Yeah.
They're hearing, oh, we need to bring all this manufacturing here, and I'm looking at the like the BLS numbers, and I'm going, we don't have the workforce for this, like it's just, it doesn't exist. And I mean, that's not to move into an immigration conversation, but immigrants are a workforce, and so we're seeing a higher crackdown on immigration, which is reducing the workforce in that area. So it's just like I can't imagine that companies would look at that and go, oh, yep, like, oh, there's a tariff, I'm moving back. Not to mention, it seems like at a certain point, countries like China are producing stuff at such a low level. I don't 100% know that it's cheaper to move even with 140% tariff, right?
Yeah.
It seems like it's still more beneficial to bank it there.
Yeah, and I think there's so much uncertainty over what the tariff price is and what it will be in the future. So that's making businesses have a very hard time knowing what to invest in. And so you're not going to see them invest in a factory if they don't know what tariffs are going to be in 5 years, right? Because maybe it's not cost efficient anymore and you're going to lose a whole bunch of money. So I think that we don't have a consistent economic policy, that you can't predict the future inhibits it. But I think what you said is right on point about the workforce. We don't have enough people to reshore manufacturing. It would be much more expensive to do so. When I say it's economically inefficient, I really mean trade. There are reasons why countries trade with each other, and there are significant economic benefits. And I think too much of the conversation in this country, because of the China shock, because China has become such a dominant manufacturer, is the sense that trade is bad or trade took our jobs or things of that nature. I think absolutely we should bring some manufacturing back. I think there's a national security issue. Like if you are in a conflict, how much can you scale up or how dependent you are on your adversary? But for the most part, I think we have to think about just diversifying our sources to work with allies, because it's just basically a fantasy to think that we're going to reshore everything here. And because of that, we may stay dependent on China because suddenly those factories are still just not being built here, so we're not reducing it. Whereas if we had agreements, we're going to purchase from Germany or Chile or some other places that might start manufacturing these things, that would be more effective. But the problem is it's always going to cost more. I mean, China, right. That's how they became so dominant, right? Is that it's cheaper, and sometimes they even sell things for a loss to dominate the market. And then once they control it, they can raise prices. But in general, it's more expensive to make these things in Western markets than it is China, or other markets outside of China. So how much are consumers really willing to pay more? And I think, right. And so I think that's a huge problem in solving this. How can you make things at the same cost China does? Is that even possible? And there may be technological solutions, but again, it is, who is trying to make those technological innovations? What are the priorities? What is our workforce? I mean, so much of our science graduates, high-level graduates, are foreign-born, right? And again, like you said, our crackdowns on immigration hurt that. So it's a difficult problem to solve, and it's not just about keep saying let's build factories here in America. There's a whole set of problems that have to be solved if you're going to do that, or even find alternative sources.
So speaking of which, I mean that actually leads into another question: are companies coming back? Like, did these tariffs actually cause any type of? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious there wasn't a huge rush, right? Especially when you saw the tariffs, get shot down under IEEPA, and the current administration just trying to find different avenues to legally put on tariffs. Have there been any companies that have just been that did do that like kind of knee jerk reaction, or has it been pretty scarce?
I haven't studied this in detail, but my understanding is there's been no major trend in manufacturing. There may be
Okay.
small increases, right? And I expect to see that you would see some increase in manufacturing, but as a something that's really notable as a blip or something, more than a blip, just anything notable on a chart or something like that. No one has seen any rush to bring manufacturing in any significant way back to the U.S.
Yeah, and that's what
Other
I've kind of
than
noticed too. Yeah.
other than what they're building through chips, through other forms of industrial policy, right?
Yeah.
The CHIPS Act, right? That has brought manufacturing to the US. But I think much better than tariffs, sort of industrial policy that subsidizes, that really focuses on building an industry and the interdependencies in an industry are probably more effective.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen kind of the same thing. I haven't seen a huge rush, and I said not that I've studied it to the level that you have. It doesn't seem like it was super like that preferred outcome just didn't really exist. I do want to bring up another part too. You've mentioned allies probably about a half a dozen times here, which is great. I just all those tariffs that we're talking about also went against our allies. Like we were tariffing countries that only had penguins and didn't have people on them. It was like the herd in McDonald Islands or something like that. Like you're saying, oh, we need to go to other countries, like maybe Germany. Well, we tariffed Germany. We tariffed every country on the planet. So how can we have this reliance on allies and also be essentially doing the same thing to our allies that we're doing to China? I mean, maybe not to the same scale, but still.
It's an excellent question. I don't have an answer for that because it doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, we have to think about what we need from our allies, what the point of an alliance is. And it's not just about, I think sometimes people think of alliances purely as kinetic warfare, right? You need them, you want them to follow you into war. But alliances are much broader than that, and economic alliances are particularly important. And so, yes, before we start tariffing, or we need to understand what it makes sense to build. Obviously, if we need a more diversified supply, and we're tariffing the countries that could provide that supply, then we're just adding cost to the consumer and making it harder to reduce our dependencies on China.
Yeah, because then it makes the only option is stuff that's domestically manufactured, and
Right.
like we just talked about, we just don't have the ability. And even if we did have the ability, the amount of time that it would take to actually get here, right? Even if we had
Absolutely.
the workforce necessary right now, I mean, we're talking years before these factories are stood up, before they're retooled into whatever we need. So there just makes no short term answer, because I've always asked that question. So say we massively tariff China. If I was a business owner in China that was selling, I would just move my factory to Laos or
That happens.
Cambodia or
Absolutely
something,
happens.
and just escape the tariffs that way, but still keep the exact same low labor costs, have a larger workforce, less environmental regulation, and so I still don't think it brings manufacturing back to the United States. So I guess my next question is, what does?
So that goes back into sort of what I said. I think other forms of industrial policy are much more effective than tariffs if we're focused on bringing back jobs, bring back manufacturing to the United States. So I think that is making, it's either way is expensive, but like tariffs seem sometimes appealing to the government because the government's not paying for tariffs, right? It is the consumer who has to pay for the tariffs, right? So you pass the cost on there. If you do more of a subsidy, sort of like the CHIPS Act, then that money is actually coming from taxpayers in that way, and it can be more politically divisive of how you're spending that money. It's just harder to find it in the budget. But I think that is way more effective in building. I mean, we can choose the quality of the things that we're building. We can look at what is most strategic to the economy, what is most strategic to national security, and I think that has real effects. They are still relatively small on the economy because they're very strategically important, but they still only make up so much of the total economy. So you're not going to see anything dramatic there, but I think it's an important way. These subsidies can get an industry started. We kind of call it in economics like infant industry, which means like you're trying to build a new industry in your country. So you have to provide, instead of just allowing pure market forces dictate whether those factories are built in the United States or not, then you have to have some sort of government. Sometimes it's protection in terms of export controls or tariffs, but more importantly, you need subsidies, and just initial. The idea is you just have it initially, and then you take your hands off the steering wheel and be like, now it's pure market forces and private. But just to stand up an industry, I think that requires government involvement.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. All right. So one more question. And since we're talking about economic warfare, I think I'd be remiss not to mention Russia and Ukraine and the situation that is somehow still going on there. I think to most people's surprise that this war is still going on, right? I think it's very obvious that one of the main reasons that Russia wants to take Ukraine is for their natural resources, because they are a very heavy natural resource rich country. I think that the ability to have warm water ports, I think that's very important. But that's affected the United States too. Like that's affected our economy. I know specifically, like, in 2022, like specifically with oil prices and the shutdown of that. How is this continuing war still affect the United States? We hear a lot about China. We're hearing obviously a lot about a lot about Iran, since we're currently in it. Is that war still affecting us, like to any type of material level?
I think like when you talk about trade, why sanctions are difficult to work, because you have a whole global economy, and so you have the initial shock of not being able to get fertilizer. Was, I know, one thing that we were having trouble getting out because we depended on Russia and the Ukraine for that. So you have the initial shock, but then usually that just means another country can start providing those things. Although, like you said, I mean, that may have been some of what we were getting through the Strait of Hormuz that we're now. So right. Trade eventually balances around the globe. So I think we're not seeing the direct effects. I mean, we were energy isolated for the most part, right? So you did see the spike in oil and gas prices right after the war, but because we produce so much energy ourselves, was able to increase our production to get enough oil on the global market in general, along with the Middle East increasing their productions, that the acute effects of the war have been pretty much mitigated. That isn't to say that there aren't any effects at all, but I think anything dramatic that you saw after the war initially started has been sort of corrected through normal market forces in the global economy.
You've really opened my eyes to like so many things in this. I feel so incredibly educated, and I'm sure all the polypolitics fans out there do also. So I really appreciate you. Do you have anything that you'd like to pitch? You have your podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, or anything else you'd like to mention or bring up?
Yeah, so our podcast is still a little bit young, but we like to have a conversation about international politics, the things that are happening currently. And we want to have a conversation that is informed by research, but is just sort of everyday conversation level. So you don't have to be an academic. And I think it makes it different. There are, of course, a lot of policy people in DC, a lot of academics talking about these things. But if you listen to one of their podcasts, it can be very difficult to understand unless you have a background in researching these things. And so we just want to bring it in a more conversational way around our dinner table. And we really hope that people come and check it out and enjoy our conversation.
Well, I'll tell you what, making complicated subjects more dinner table is like my bread and butter. I love it. I believe you have a new listener with me, because I'm definitely going to tune in and listen to some stuff, because you have very, very much educated me. Dr. Kellogg, thank you so much for being on the show. We really, really appreciate you. And we'll definitely have to have you on another time whenever you would like.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Polypolitics Podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.